Aisha was the kind of girl most people noticed but never really knew. She was always there, quietly sitting in the back row of the classroom, her notebooks neatly arranged, her pencils sharpened, her eyes focused on the board. Yet she rarely raised her hand, never jumped into conversations, and avoided unnecessary attention. Some thought she was shy, others believed she was simply too serious, but in truth, Aisha just liked her own quiet world. She found comfort in listening more than speaking, in watching more than performing. Her classmates often whispered about her. "Why does she never talk?" someone would ask during recess. "Maybe she thinks she's better than us," another would guess. But Aisha never gave them a reason to dislike her. She never argued, never snapped back, and never made a scene. If someone borrowed her pencil, she gave it without a word. If a group project was assigned, she did her part quietly and let others take the spotlight. The teachers admired her for her discipline. Her notebooks were filled with tidy handwriting, every line carefully written, every margin respected. Whenever a teacher asked her a direct question, she answered softly, never stumbling, always correct. But after that, she would go back into her shell, as if she wanted to disappear among the crowd. In the noisy chaos of school life, where children laughed, shouted, and sometimes argued, Aisha's silence made her stand out. To some, it was mysterious, to others, it was strange. And to Hamza, the boy who loved being the center of attention, it was an opportunity. Hamza was the exact opposite of Aisha. Loud, confident, and always surrounded by friends, he enjoyed the energy of being noticed. Whether it was on the playground, in the classroom, or in the cafeteria, he wanted to be the one people looked at. He told jokes that made others laugh, sometimes at the expense of his classmates. He played tricks, sometimes harmless, sometimes not, just to keep the spotlight on himself. For Hamza, life at school was a stage, and he was the main character. Naturally, he noticed Aisha's quietness. To him, her silence wasn't just unusual, it was almost like a challenge. Everyone else gave him a reaction: laughter, annoyance, or even anger, but Aisha gave him nothing. She didn't laugh at his jokes, she didn't argue when he teased, and she didn't seem affected when he tried to get her attention. It irritated him in a way he couldn't explain. One afternoon during recess, Hamza leaned against the railing with his group of friends, watching the schoolyard. His eyes caught Aisha sitting alone on a bench, reading a small book while the others played. "She's always like that," Hamza muttered to his friends. "She never talks to anyone. Doesn't she get bored?" His friends shrugged, not giving it much thought, but Hamza kept staring. Something inside him wanted to break that calm expression on her face, to make her react, to prove that she wasn't untouchable. It was as if her silence made him invisible, and that was something Hamza could not tolerate. The next day, he tried. As Aisha walked past the lockers, carrying her books close to her chest, Hamza called out, "Hey, quiet girl. Do you ever talk?" His friends laughed, waiting for her to respond. Aisha looked at him for a second, then lowered her gaze and kept walking, as if he hadn't spoken at all. Hamza's smile faltered. Most students would at least roll their eyes or tell him to stop. But Aisha gave him nothing. No reaction at all. "See that," he told his friends. "She thinks she's too good for us." His friends laughed again, encouraging him, and in that moment Hamza decided he wasn't going to let it go. Over the next few days, he made more attempts. Sometimes he joked loudly when she passed by, hoping she would get embarrassed. Other times, he tried to block her way in the hallway, just to see if she would say something. But Aisha simply walked around him, quiet and calm, never once showing anger or frustration. What Hamza didn't understand was that Aisha wasn't ignoring him out of pride or arrogance. She had simply learned long ago that silence was her strength. Words could lead to arguments, Arguments could lead to trouble, and she wanted no part of it. Her world was peaceful, and she wasn't willing to let anyone drag her out of it. Yet, in Hamza's eyes, her calmness became a kind of defiance. He began to feel as though she was challenging his presence, his status as someone everyone noticed. And that thought pushed him to plan something bigger. One Friday morning, the class was buzzing with excitement. It was the last day before the weekend, and the students were already looking forward to playing games after school. Aisha, as usual, sat quietly at her desk, sketching small shapes in the corner of her notebook while waiting for the teacher to arrive. Hamza sat across the room with his friends, whispering and laughing. His eyes kept drifting toward her, and his mind formed an idea. He leaned closer to his group and said, "Today, I'm going to make her talk. You'll see. She won't stay quiet forever." His friends smirked, eager to see what he would do. For them, it was entertainment, another moment where Hamza would prove his boldness. The bell rang, classes went by, and lunchtime arrived. The schoolyard filled with noise, children running, playing, shouting, laughing. In the middle of it all, Aisha sat near the edge of the courtyard, a small lunchbox in her lap. She ate slowly, enjoying the warmth of the sun on her face, unaware of the plan forming across the yard. Hamza nudged his friends and started walking toward her. He moved with the kind of confidence he always carried, a grin on his face, as if the whole scene was a show put on for the audience that had already begun watching. Students noticed, whispers spread, and soon a small crowd was curious to see what Hamza would do this time. Aisha, still eating quietly, didn't notice the growing attention. Her calm world was about to collide with Hamza's loud one, and neither of them knew that what happened in the next few moments would change how everyone in school saw them. For Hamza, it was just another chance to prove himself. For Aisha, it was the beginning of something that would reveal a side of her no one expected. And as the crowd waited, the story took its first real step toward the moment that would shock them all. Hamza walked across the schoolyard with a wide grin on his face, his friends following close behind like a group of loyal supporters. The air was filled with the sound of laughter, bouncing balls, and the chatter of students enjoying their lunch break. But the moment people saw Hamza heading toward Aisha, many of them paused to watch. Everyone knew that Hamza was about to try something, and curiosity spread quickly. Aisha sat quietly near the corner of the yard, a small lunchbox on her lap. She was nibbling at her food slowly, lost in her own world, when she sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The chatter seemed to lower around her, and she could almost feel eyes watching. When she looked up, she saw Hamza approaching, his expression playful, his friends whispering and laughing behind him. She sighed softly and lowered her gaze, hoping he would just walk past. But Hamza had no intention of walking past. He stopped right in front of her and crossed his arms, casting his shadow over her. "Still eating all alone," he said loudly, making sure his voice carried so that others could hear. "Don't you get tired of being by yourself all the time?" Some students chuckled in the background. Aisha didn't answer. She picked another piece of food and continued eating as if he wasn't there. Hamza tilted his head, pretending to be surprised. "Oh, so the quiet girl ignores me again? What's the matter? You don't know how to talk." His friends laughed, and a few other students joined in, entertained by the scene. But Aisha's calmness never broke. She looked up at him briefly, her eyes steady and calm, then looked back down. Her silence made Hamza's smile fade just a little. He wasn't used to being ignored. Usually, when he teased someone, they either got angry, nervous, or embarrassed. That reaction gave him energy, gave him something to brag about later. But with Aisha, it was like talking to a wall that refused to answer. And the more she stayed silent, the more he wanted to push her. Hamza crouched down to her level, his grin returning. "Hey, quiet girl. Do you think you're better than everyone else? Is that why you don't talk? Aisha closed her lunchbox gently and stood up. She wasn't angry, and she didn't look upset. She simply gathered her things and started to walk away. The crowd of students watching whispered among themselves, some disappointed that there was no reaction. But Hamza couldn't let it go. He called out after her, "Walking away again? You can't always hide, you know." His words echoed across the yard, and laughter followed from his friends. For Aisha, this wasn't new. She had faced such moments before, not just in school but in life outside as well. She had learned long ago that walking away was better than wasting energy on people who only wanted a reaction. Still, something about the growing crowd made her heart beat a little faster. She didn't like attention, and now all eyes were on her. As she moved toward the school building, Hamza suddenly stepped in front of her, blocking her path. The crowd hushed, waiting to see what would happen next. "You can't just walk away," he said, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Not when I'm talking to you." Aisha looked at him directly this time. Her eyes were calm but firm, and for a brief second, Hamza felt something he couldn't describe, a strange discomfort, almost like she wasn't afraid of him at all. But he quickly shook it off and puffed out his chest, determined to keep his role as the bold one. "Say something," he demanded, his tone louder now. "Anything. Or are you scared?" Students whispered again, waiting. Some of them weren't sure if they wanted to see what would happen. A few even looked uneasy, but no one dared to stop Hamza. Aisha didn't respond. She took a deep breath and tried to step aside again, but Hamza shifted quickly, blocking her once more. The crowd grew thicker, and the atmosphere changed from amusement to tension. Hamza's friends encouraged him. "Come on, make her talk," one of them shouted. Another laughed and said, "Yeah, she can't stay quiet forever." Hamza smirked, fueled by their words. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" For a moment, it felt like time slowed down. Aisha stood there, her calm expression unchanged, but inside, her mind was racing. She had always avoided confrontation, always chosen silence, but she could feel the pressure building. She knew this wasn't just about her anymore. The whole schoolyard was watching, and Hamza wasn't going to let her go easily. Her silence had once been her shield, but now, it was being tested in front of everyone. Hamza finally made his move. He lightly tapped the book she was holding, making it fall from her hands onto the ground. The crowd gasped softly. To them, it was the beginning of something bigger. Hamza's grin widened. "Oops," he said casually. "Didn't mean to do that. Are you going to pick it up, or should I?" Aisha bent down slowly and picked up the book. She dusted it off with care, as if it was the most important thing in her world, and then looked at Hamza once more. Her eyes held no anger, no fear, but something else, something steady, unshakable. For the first time, Hamza felt unsure. He had expected her to cry, shout, or at least show some sign of weakness. But the way she calmly picked up her book, without saying a single word, unsettled him. It was as though she wasn't afraid of him at all, and that realization didn't sit well with him. The crowd waited, whispering, sensing that something was about to happen. Hamza, however, couldn't back down now. Too many eyes were on him. Too many people were expecting a show. If he stopped, it would look like he had lost. And Hamza wasn't used to losing. "Fine," he said with a smirk, though his confidence wavered slightly. "If you won't talk, maybe I'll just have to make you." The words hung in the air, heavier than before. Students exchanged glances, wondering how far he would go. Some of them began to feel uneasy, wishing a teacher would appear, but no one stepped forward. Aisha held her book close to her chest and stood still, her calmness unbroken. Inside, She was preparing herself. She didn't want to fight, she didn't want to be part of this scene, but she also knew she couldn't run forever. Hamza had cornered her, and soon, the moment would come when she would have no choice but to respond. And that moment was closer than anyone realized. The schoolyard was unusually quiet now. The sound of laughter and games that usually filled the air had slowly faded as more and more students gathered to watch the scene between Hamza and Aisha. Even the ones playing near the swings or skipping rope had paused to see what would happen. Aisha stood calmly with her book pressed against her chest, while Hamza stood tall in front of her, his friends forming a half circle behind him. The silence made Hamza uneasy. He thrived on noise, on people cheering, on laughter and reactions. But right now, the crowd was waiting, holding their breath. He told himself that this was his chance to finally break through Aisha's calmness and prove himself once again. "All this time you just sit there, acting like you're invisible," he said loudly, his eyes locked on hers. "But today, you're not going to walk away." Aisha didn't move. Her face was still calm, almost too calm. Her silence was not the silence of fear, it was steady, controlled, as though she already knew what was coming and was prepared for it. Hamza stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You think being quiet makes you strong? Let's see what happens now." The crowd leaned in, eager to see. For them, it felt like watching the first chapter of a story that had been waiting to unfold. Hamza extended his hand toward Aisha's book, planning to snatch it again. But this time, something unexpected happened. Before his fingers could touch it, Aisha moved with a swiftness no one had ever seen from her. She took one small step back, holding her book firmly, and looked him directly in the eyes. Her gaze was sharp yet calm, and it froze Hamza mid-action. For a split second, he felt something he had never felt before: hesitation. The crowd noticed too. Murmurs spread among the students. "Did you see that?" one whispered. "She didn't even flinch." Hamza forced a laugh, trying to shake off the discomfort. "Oh, so you can move." Finally, a reaction. But his smile didn't feel as confident as before. Aisha took a quiet breath, and then, to everyone's shock, she spoke for the first time in front of him. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying enough strength to silence the whispers around them. "Why do you need me to react?" she asked. "Isn't your laughter enough for you?" The words were simple, but the way she said them made Hamza blink in surprise. It wasn't angry, it wasn't fearful, it was calm, almost like she was asking an honest question. The crowd gasped softly. They had never heard Aisha speak like that before. Hamza tried to recover. "So you can talk? Finally. I was beginning to think you'd lost your voice." He forced a laugh, but the sound rang hollow. Aisha continued, her tone even and steady. "You laugh with your friends because you want them to think you're strong. But if you were really strong, you wouldn't need to prove it to anyone." The words struck deeper than Hamza expected. His friends looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. The students in the crowd whispered again, their curiosity turning into awe. Hamza's smile faltered. He wasn't prepared for her to speak, let alone say something that cut through his confidence. He stepped forward quickly, trying to regain control of the moment. "Don't act smart with me. I'm not afraid of you." Aisha didn't move. She didn't step back. She simply looked at him with the same steady eyes and said, "I never asked you to be." The crowd reacted with quiet gasps. It was subtle, but everyone could feel the shift in power. For the first time, Hamza wasn't leading the scene. Aisha's calm words were turning the attention away from his show and onto her unexpected strength. Hamza clenched his fists at his sides, not in anger, but in frustration. How could a few soft words shake him more than all the teasing and mocking he had done? His friends, who usually cheered him on, were unusually quiet now, their smiles fading. Determined not to lose face, Hamza made his next move. He reached out quickly, trying to grab her lunchbox this time. But before his hand could touch it, Aisha stepped to the side gracefully, making him stumble slightly in front of everyone. The crowd laughed softly, but it wasn't at Aisha, it was at Hamza. Red-faced, Hamza turned back toward her. But Aisha simply stood there, her expression calm as ever, as if she had predicted his move. "You think silence is weakness," she said gently, "but sometimes silence is the strongest answer." Her words echoed across the courtyard. The crowd, once noisy, was now quiet again, hanging on every word. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but there was something about the way she spoke that made everyone listen. Hamza opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. He felt trapped, not by her actions, but by the weight of her calmness. His heart raced, not because he was scared, but because for the first time, he didn't know what to do next. Aisha took a small step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "You wanted me to break. But maybe you didn't realize you're the one who's breaking right now." The crowd gasped again, some even nodding slightly in agreement. Hamza's friends looked away, embarrassed, no longer cheering him on. For Hamza, the realization hit hard. He had wanted to prove himself, to make Aisha react, to show everyone that he was in control. But in less than 10 seconds, the moment had turned against him. He wasn't the one leading anymore, he was the one being exposed. His grin disappeared completely. His hands dropped to his sides. And for the first time in front of the whole school, Hamza felt small. Aisha didn't gloat, didn't laugh, didn't raise her voice. She simply walked past him, calm and steady, her book still in her hands. The crowd parted silently to let her through, their eyes following her as she left. Hamza stood frozen, his friends awkwardly shifting behind him. The students who once looked at him with admiration now looked at him with disbelief. In just a few words, in less than 10 seconds, Aisha had turned the story upside down. She had revealed that strength wasn't always loud, and sometimes the quietest voice could carry the greatest power. Hamza realized that this was not the reaction he had wanted. It was worse than being ignored. It was regret. And as the students slowly began to disperse, whispers filling the air about what had just happened, Hamza knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Hamza stood in the middle of the schoolyard, frozen in place long after Aisha had walked away. The crowd that once cheered him on was no longer laughing. Students whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that made him feel like the ground beneath him was slipping away. His friends, who had always been quick to clap him on the back and boost his confidence, looked uncomfortable and avoided his eyes. It was strange for Hamza. He had always been the loudest voice, the boy who could make others laugh at will, the one who controlled the mood of the schoolyard. But now, silence hung around him, and the only thing echoing in his mind were Aisha's words, "You wanted me to break. But maybe you didn't realize you're the one who's breaking right now." He clenched his fists and tried to laugh it off, hoping to recover some of his pride. "Come on, it wasn't a big deal," he muttered to his friends. "I was just playing around." But none of them responded. One gave a weak smile, another shifted awkwardly, and one simply said, "Yeah, maybe we should head inside." Then, without waiting for him, they slowly drifted back toward the school building, leaving Hamza standing alone. The regret began to sink in. He hadn't just lost a game, he had lost his audience. And for someone like Hamza, who thrived on being noticed, that silence was heavier than any punishment. When he walked into class later, the atmosphere was different. Usually, he was greeted with smiles or playful comments, but this time, the room was filled with quiet stares. Some students looked at him with disappointment, others with disapproval, and a few even shook their heads. Hamza felt every pair of eyes burning into him, and for the first time, he wished people weren't looking at him at all. The teacher entered, and the class quickly settled. Hamza sat in his seat, but he couldn't concentrate. His thoughts kept replaying the scene in the courtyard. Aisha's steady eyes. Her calm voice. The way the crowd had shifted against him. It was a memory he couldn't escape, no matter how hard he tried. After school, as Hamza walked through the gates, he noticed students whispering again. This time, he knew the whispers weren't about his jokes or his boldness. They were about how Aisha, the quiet girl, had stood up to him without even raising her voice. She hadn't shouted, hadn't pushed, hadn't run away. She had simply spoken, and it had been enough to shake him. Hamza's chest tightened. He thought about what his friends might be saying when he wasn't around. He thought about the way the teachers might hear the story from students. And worst of all, he thought about how Aisha must have felt constantly enduring his teasing, never saying a word until today. When he reached home, his mother noticed the change immediately. "Hamza," she said gently as he walked in, "you're awfully quiet today. Did something happen at school?" Hamza shook his head quickly. "No, nothing." But inside, the regret grew heavier. That night, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but his thoughts were loud. He remembered the look in Aisha's eyes, not angry, not afraid, but steady and calm. It wasn't the reaction he had wanted. He had wanted her to feel small, but instead, he was the one who felt smaller than ever before. Sleep didn't come easily. When he finally closed his eyes, he dreamed of the schoolyard, the crowd's whispers, and Aisha's voice repeating, "Silence is the strongest answer." The next day at school, things didn't improve. The moment Hamza walked into the courtyard, students fell silent for a moment, then quickly went back to their conversations. He knew they were talking about him, though no one said it to his face. His friends still hung around him, but the energy was gone. They no longer cheered him on or asked what prank he was planning next. Instead, they acted as if nothing had happened, but Hamza could feel the distance growing. During break, he saw Aisha walking down the hall, her books held neatly in her arms. For a moment, he thought about approaching her, but his pride stopped him. What would he even say? Would she listen? Would she forgive him? He watched as she walked past, calm as ever, not even glancing in his direction. Somehow, that hurt more than anything else. The teachers began to notice the change too. One afternoon, Hamza's homeroom teacher asked him to stay after class. She looked at him with kind but serious eyes. "Hamza," she said, "I've heard a few things from students. They say you've been bothering Aisha. Is that true?" Hamza's throat went dry. He wanted to deny it, but the memory of the courtyard played again in his head. He lowered his gaze and muttered, "I didn't mean to. I was just joking." The teacher sighed. Sometimes what feels like a joke to you doesn't feel like a joke to someone else. Words and actions can leave marks we don't always see. Think about that, Hamza. You're a smart boy, you can do better than this. Her words added to the weight already pressing on his heart. He nodded slowly, unable to meet her eyes. Over the next few days, Hamza noticed how things had shifted. Students who once admired him now seemed distant. Some avoided him. Others talked openly about how strong Aisha had been. The more he heard, the more regret burned inside him. One afternoon, as he sat alone in the cafeteria, he overheard two students at the next table. "I never thought she'd stand up to him," one said. "But she did, and it was amazing." "Yeah," the other replied. "It's like she didn't even need to fight. She just showed him that silence is stronger." Hamza lowered his head, pushing his food around with his spoon. Their words stung, but he knew they were true. That evening, as he walked home, the regret finally grew too heavy to carry quietly. He remembered Aisha's calmness, her dignity, and the way she had handled everything with such grace. He thought about how unfair he had been, and how wrong he was to mistake her quietness for weakness. For the first time, Hamza admitted to himself that he had made a mistake, a big one. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized he needed to make it right. But apologizing wasn't easy for someone like Hamza. Pride had always been his shield, his way of standing tall in front of others. Now, he had to decide whether to lower that shield and face the truth. The next morning, as he walked into school, Hamza knew what he had to do. His chest felt heavy, his steps slower than usual, but his mind was clear. He couldn't erase what he had done, but maybe he could show that he had learned from it. And deep inside, he hoped that Aisha, quiet, calm, and stronger than anyone had realized, might give him the chance to do so. The next morning felt different for Hamza. He woke up earlier than usual, not because he wanted to, but because his mind didn't let him sleep peacefully. All night, he had thought about what happened in the courtyard, the whispers that still floated around the school, and Aisha's calm words that kept echoing in his head. He had always been proud of being confident and bold, but now that same pride felt heavy on his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, Hamza didn't want the attention of others. He didn't want to walk into school and hear whispers or see curious eyes following him. He just wanted to make things right. When he reached school, the usual excitement of the morning greeted him: students rushing to class, laughter in the hallways, the sound of shoes tapping against the floor. But Hamza felt none of it. He walked slowly, carrying a nervousness that was new to him. His friends spotted him near the lockers and waved, but the smiles on their faces seemed forced, as if they didn't know how to act around him anymore. He waved back half-heartedly and kept moving. He knew what he had to do, but his heart pounded at the thought. Approaching Aisha wasn't going to be easy. He had hurt her, even if she had never shown it. He had made her the center of unwanted attention, and he had embarrassed himself in the process. Now, the only way forward was to face her with honesty. In class, Hamza could hardly focus. His eyes kept drifting to the back corner where Aisha sat quietly, just as she always did. She wrote neatly in her notebook, her expression calm, as if nothing had changed. But Hamza knew things had changed. For everyone else, she was still the quiet girl, but for him, she had become the strongest person in the room. During break, Hamza finally gathered his courage. He stood up from his desk, took a deep breath, and walked toward her. Students nearby noticed, and a few whispered to each other, curious about what he was going to do. The memory of the courtyard was still fresh, and everyone knew the two hadn't spoken since that day. Aisha looked up as he approached, her eyes calm and steady as always. Hamza paused, suddenly unsure of how to begin. For someone who always had words ready, jokes, remarks, clever comebacks, he found himself completely speechless. He started, then stopped. He glanced around at the students who were watching and quickly lowered his voice. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Aisha didn't answer immediately. She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable, then gave a small nod. Hamza felt a mixture of relief and nervousness as they stepped out into the hallway. The hallway was quieter, though a few curious eyes still peeked from the classroom door. Hamza rubbed the back of his neck, searching for the right words. "I know I made things hard for you," he said finally. "I teased you, I tried to embarrass you, and I thought it was funny. But it wasn't. I was wrong." Aisha listened silently, her face calm, giving him space to continue. Hamza swallowed hard. "I just wanted everyone to laugh with me. I thought that made me strong. But you showed me that I was wrong about strength. You didn't even have to shout or fight back. You just stood your ground. And I regret what I did." It was difficult for him to admit, but as the words left his mouth, he felt lighter. His pride no longer chained him the way it once did. Aisha's eyes softened slightly, though her calm expression remained. I never wanted to be your enemy, Hamza, she said quietly. I only wanted peace. Hamza nodded quickly. I know. And I made it difficult for you. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly. For a moment, silence filled the hallway. Hamza waited nervously, unsure of how she would respond. Then Aisha gave a small nod. Apology accepted, she said simply. Her words were soft, but they carried a weight that lifted something off Hamza's chest. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thank you, he said quietly. They walked back into the classroom together, and though no one said anything, everyone noticed. Whispers spread again, but this time the tone was different. The boy who once laughed at others was now learning humility, and the girl who had always been quiet had shown everyone the true meaning of strength. Over the next few weeks, Hamza began to change. The difference wasn't sudden, but it was noticeable. He no longer made fun of students to get attention. Instead, he started helping classmates when he could, explaining homework, sharing supplies, or including those who often felt left out. At first, people were surprised, even suspicious, but slowly, they began to see that his change was real. Hamza's friends noticed too. Some of them teased him at first. What happened to the old Hamza, they asked. But when they saw the respect he was slowly regaining, their teasing faded. Some even followed his example, realizing that kindness earned more admiration than jokes at someone else's expense. Aisha, meanwhile, returned to her quiet ways. She still sat at the back of the classroom, still preferred her silence, and still walked calmly through the halls. But something had shifted for her as well. She no longer carried the quietness as a shield. She carried it with confidence, knowing that her silence wasn't weakness but strength. And the students around her noticed it too. They began to respect her in ways they never had before. One day, during group work in class, Hamza found himself paired with Aisha. At first, he felt nervous, unsure if she would be comfortable working with him. But Aisha treated him no differently than anyone else. They worked quietly, sharing ideas when needed, and for the first time, Hamza realized how thoughtful she really was. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words carried meaning. By the end of the project, Hamza felt grateful. He had not only gained respect back from others, but he had also gained a valuable lesson from Aisha. Months later, when the memory of that day in the courtyard was still occasionally whispered about, it was no longer told as a story of embarrassment for Hamza. Instead, it was remembered as the moment the loudest boy in school learned a lesson from the quietest girl. It was the moment when strength was redefined not by who shouted the loudest, but by who stood the calmest. Hamza never forgot that lesson. He carried it with him, not just in school but beyond, reminding himself that true strength doesn't come from making others feel small. It comes from lifting them up, respecting them, and knowing when silence speaks louder than words. And Aisha, though she never sought attention, became an example for many. Her quiet courage inspired others to believe that they didn't need to change who they were to be respected. Sometimes, being true to yourself was the strongest thing you could do. The story of Hamza and Aisha became a silent lesson within the school. Students remembered it whenever they felt the urge to tease someone or whenever they doubted their own strength. It was a reminder that every person carries a kind of strength that may not be visible at first glance. For Hamza, regret had turned into growth. For Aisha, silence had turned into respect. And for the school, that single moment in the courtyard became a lasting memory, a memory that taught them all what true strength really looks like.